real reason why you're not seeing the muscle gains you want. It's the fact that you're over a certain threshold of body fat percentage and you're insulin resistant, and that's what's keeping you stuck, bro. And if you watch to the end of this video, I'm going to be running you through the exact body fat percentage threshold you need to maintain during both your cutting and your building phases if you want to get the most out of all the time you're putting into the gym. Because fuck spending all year training hard, but only getting 30% of the output you could be fucking getting. So this is like, as I said, something that 99% of guys miss, bro. And it's something I fucking wish I knew a whole lot earlier. And it's not just about, eating the right macros, training the right thing, because you could have everything, right? You could eat the right macros, train effectively, but if your body fat percentage is like so fucked and your insulin response isn't effective because your body fat percentage, then, bro, we're just fucking up our own gains. So now insulin, and what does that mean? Right, so insulin is a natural hormone responsible to convert glucose, which is a sugar and a carb, and amino acid proteins into muscle, and it's released every time we eat. So think about it. Let's say we have 3 meals a day, right? You eat a meal, dominant carb-based meal, and as soon as we eat, we have a spike in insulin. Our body releases insulin whenever we eat, and we can get into that a little bit later. And you have a spike of insulin, and then you have a drop. So like you get that temporary spike of energy, and that could either be, a high GI carb, which means that the glycemic index is higher. So every time you eat that carb meal, it gets converted to your bloodstream quicker, so it gets turned to glycogen quicker, which means you have a high spike of insulin, right? And then you get another crash. You get a rise and you get another crash. That's why it's always important to eat like 5 or so meals a day, so you have a dominant and stable energy throughout the day. Like think about it, you have 2 big meals and you have a big spike of carbs, a big spike of insulin. You get a lot of energy and then you get a crash throughout the day. That's why it's important to maintain constant eating every single day. And then glucose, through the term glucose in there. So glucose is a simple sugar, which is a form of a carbohydrate, yeah? And it serves as the body's main source of energy. And it comes from carbohydrates every time we eat. And we've got to realize that when our human body doesn't use it for energy, whenever we're training, whenever we're working out, it stores it either in the liver or, most importantly, in the muscles. And this stored form of glucose is called glycogen. And your glycogen has to do with how full your muscles look. Like let's say you have a refeed the night before on a Friday night, you might have a refeed. And you're already at like a low fat percentage, like 10% body fat. Like Jada knows about this, and you have that refeed because your glycogen stores are depleted because all your energy is drained out during your deficit, during your cut. You have that refeed. Those extra calories get converted to glucose, get converted to glycogen, and then you have like a nastiest pump session in the morning. So that pump is directly influenced by you having more glycogen in your body. Now, the difference between glucose and insulin and what glycogen actually does. So every time you eat a meal, a carb, right? Carbs are broken down into glucose, which enters the bloodstream. Once it enters the bloodstream, the blood sugar rises. And what happens then is that your pancreas detects the high blood sugar, right? So your body combats the increase of blood sugar in your bloodstream and tries to bring it down. And that's when insulin is released from your pancreas, and it helps store the glucose into the muscle, which is now called the glycogen. And whenever you eat protein, there's a similar effect on that. So you eat the protein, and instead of the glucose being turned into the bloodstream, you can see my mouse there, right? Hectic. Instead of the glucose getting turned into the bloodstream, the protein is actually broken down into amino acids. They're broken down into amino acids, and then they enter the bloodstream. But now your blood amino level rises, right? So it's similar to the blood sugar level, but it's blood amino level. And that's when your insulin is also released, but it's at a smaller level than when you eat carbs, right? And that helps drive amino acids into your muscle cells. And this is what causes muscle protein synthesis to take place. But it's very important because muscle protein synthesis, I'm sure you boys heard this term before. Muscle protein synthesis only takes place under 2 conditions. You can eat as much as you want, but if you're not having the right training, right, if you don't have the right muscle breakdown tissue happening at the same time, as well as eating enough protein, therefore enough amino acid availability in your bloodstream, so you can convert
all those cells to building blocks in muscle, then you're not going to make any muscle protein synthesis. And now, so pretty much your amino acids are used on the spot. Let's say you've trained, you eat a high protein meal. All those amino acids get converted to your bloodstream, gets converted to your muscle straight away. And unlike glycogen here, because glycogen, as I told you boys, stays in your muscle to be able to use our stored energy. Your amino acids can't do that. So you either use them on the spot as soon as you train, or they're just wasted. So it's very important to be training consistently, at least 4 or 5 times a week. That way, all the extra food you're eating is actually going to muscle and is actually building muscle as opposed to just getting wasted. So now we've spoken about carbs, the effect of glucose and insulin on carbs, as well as protein. But the only macronutrient that doesn't have an insulin response is fats. So carbs have the highest insulin response. Then you have protein, which is moderate, and fat has pretty much little to none. Are you guys following me so far? How's everything?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good, bro.
Hectic. And now you understand which macronutrients actually trigger an insulin response from our body, and you understand the timing of it. So every time you eat a high dense carb meal, you get a high spike in insulin because you might have a high GI carb. You might have a bagel in the morning, which gets converted to glycogen quicker. You have a high spike in insulin. That's why I say you eat a bagel first thing in the morning before you train, and you don't want to train fasted yet.
Mm.
So you know that, and then so you know when you get a spike in insulin. Now we've got to realize that's very important, but it's not as important as how well our body responds to it. Because we could be doing our meal timing right. You could time the meals perfectly. You could be eating the perfect macro per meal. But if your body's not actually picking up the extra insulin, if it's insulin resistant like it has here, then all those nutrients will actually go to fat rather than muscle. When you're insulin sensitive, your body responds well to the insulin from all the macronutrients. So more of them are partitioned to muscle tissue as opposed to fat. So insulin sensitivity means you have a lower insulin resistance. And the opposite goes for the other way. So when you have a lower insulin sensitivity, because a lot of guys, I'm sure you guys heard that term in the fitness industry. Insulin sensitivity, insulin resistance, bro, I heard that term for years and I didn't even know what the fuck it really meant. But this is what it means. Whenever you have a lower insulin sensitivity, you're less sensitive to insulin. You're more resistant to the insulin. So your body doesn't respond well and more macronutrients are stored to fat, which is not what we want, right? So insulin sensitivity, the nutrients you're eating from all the carbs, right? It gets converted to glycogen, amino acids, the building blocks of our muscle. You get lean gains, but if you're insulin resistant, the nutrients go to fat, which is not what we want. Are you boys finding it so far?
Yeah, cool, bro.
No. So therefore, your insulin sensitivity has an indirect but powerful role in muscle building. So it's not like your testosterone, which has a direct role in protein synthesis. It has an indirect role in your muscle building capability, but it's very, very important. And now I want to throw you this analogy. So look at muscle cells like locked doors, right? Let's use that locked door for an example. Use that locked door for an example, right? You try to go into your door. Let's say you're going to the gym and the gym door is locked and you're trying to get to the other side of the gym. Inside the gym is muscle gains. Think about it. And think of you as like a glucose or an amino acid cell. And you're trying to get in the door. And you've got a key to get in the door. Insulin is the key that goes in the door, right? And if the key is smooth, that means you have a high insulin sensitivity, which opens the door and it goes directly to the muscle. But if you're insulin resistant or you have a low insulin sensitivity, the key jams in the door, it can't open the door, it might open it a little bit. And most of the macronutrients or most of the building blocks of muscle, which is amino acids, and most of the stored energy, which is glucose that gets converted to glycogen from carbohydrates, doesn't go into the muscle. It bounces and it gets stored as fat. And now, what determines whether the door is open or locked? So I'm going to ask you boys that question. Maybe drop in the comments what you think. So what from what we've spoken about so far determines whether the door is open or locked? What do you think? it's whether you're insulin sensitive or not, but what actually determines if you're insulin sensitive or not? That's the question. And I've dropped it already a couple of times. So what determines whether we are actually insulin sensitive or not? So think about it, yeah? Your micronutrients, your carbs, your proteins determine the amount of insulin that goes into your body, right? The amount of insulin that goes in. And your key is your insulin sensitivity. But what actually determines how sensitive you are as a human being? Because you can't control what you go into your body, but something from your body depends on whether you're actually insulin sensitive or not. Because you could eat all the micronutrients in the world, you could have a big spike of insulin, but if it doesn't go to your muscle, it goes to fat. Meal timing is one of them. That's good, but it's not the most important. And I've dropped it a few times already, so I'm going to get into it. The most important one by far is your body fat percentage. Right, so when you have high fat percentage, when it exceeds a certain threshold, that means you have more body inflammation and a lower insulin sensitivity. That's why you always see the leaner guys. The leaner you are between a certain threshold, which we'll get into a little bit, you always get the cleanest gains. You always have the best pump whenever you're really lean, right? As well as your muscle mass. Think about it. The more muscle you have, the more area you have for your glucose to get disposed to the muscle. Therefore, you have a high insulin sensitivity. You got to realize the more muscle you have, the more you can attract, the more you can absorb. Yeah. Your training, resistance training is key for gains, natural gains, building the muscle, because those two have a direct correlation with one another. Sleep's a massive one because sleep has a lot to do with fatigued. So if you're getting under 5 hours sleep every night consistently, that's going to really impact the amount of nutrients that go into your body. That's going to impact, let's say you have a meal with 50 grams of protein and you're at 10% body fat. Not all that protein will go in, even though you're highly sensitive, you might be highly sensitive to insulin because you're underslept, you're fatigued, you're inflamed because low sleep causes inflammation as well. That will impact the amount of macronutrients that absorb to muscle. As well as stress. Stress is cortisol. That's the stress hormone. The more stressed you are, the more inflamed you are, and the worse response you have to inflammation. The last one would be nutrition timing. Carbs post workout are the best. That's why you always hear guys say you got to have a high GI carb before you train. Gets converted to energy, gets converted to glycogen as well after you train. That's why I always in my Greek yogurt after I train. Protein, Greek yogurt, crunch nuts, honey. Honey is a high GI carb, which is a high glycemic index carb as well. And now, here is this graph that shows you the difference between the guy that's 12% body fat and 22% body fat. So the guy that's 12% body fat will have 70% nutrition going straight to muscle and 30% to fat. So you see the massive difference between 70% of the nutrition going directly to the muscle versus 40%. So that's nearly over double. And now that shows to me, just by looking at the graph there, that there is a direct correlation between body fat as well as the body's ability to respond to insulin. Would you guys say that's correct?
Yep.
100%. So there's a relationship between body fat percentage and insulin. So at a higher body fat percentage, you are less sensitive to insulin. So you could train perfect, you could eat perfect, but that doesn't mean that you're getting the most out of all the eating and out of all the training, right? You're operating at 40% as opposed to 70%. So we're leaving a lot of gains on the table, right? Because the higher your body fat percentage is, the more inflamed your body becomes, the worse your insulin gets, and the more insulin you need to do the same job, and the more nutrients get stored as fat as opposed to muscle. And on the flip side, the leaner you are to a degree, because there's a point as a natural athlete that the more lean you get, the more stress you have, right? Which also plays a direct impact in insulin sensitivity, which we'll get into in the below graph. So up to a certain degree, you are very sensitive to insulin, which means your body can use less insulin to get the nutrients into muscle cells than you would if you were highly restricted with insulin. Now, this is my favorite graph here that shows you the direct correlation between your ideal body fat percentage for muscle growth for both an enhanced and natural athlete. comparing someone that's natural and someone that takes performance enhancers, testosterone, any anabolics, right? And if you're a natural like you guys are, your sweet spot is around 10 to 15% body fat. You can see here, the natural gain peaks at 13% body fat. And that's where your insulin sensitivity, your recovery, your muscle building potential are all optimized. Anything below 8%, if you're a natural athlete, this is the enhanced insulin sensitivity curve. But if you're below 8%, the natural one would kind of drop slowly, right? Because as I said, the leaner you are, the more stress you have, the more fatigued you are, the less sleep you may get, right? Because your body, like anything below 8%, like you might look really good, you might look really lean, you might look really healthy, but your body's under a lot of stress, and that also affects your insulin sensitivity. Yeah? And you can't really grow much muscle when you're that lean, and you might be in a catabolic state where your body actually eats the muscle. That's why you never want to stay in a deficit for too long, and you always want to take preventative measures like refeeds, etc., and only stay on the cut for around 2 months maximum. That's why you bulk most of the year. You bulk to a degree. You never want to bulk above 15%, really. Anything above 17%, you're pushing it. And you'd rather lean build. This is why it's very important to lean build, because you'd rather stay under a certain fat percentage to optimize your gains as opposed to dirty bulking, spending fucking 3 months at 20% body fat and not getting the amount of lean muscle mass you would be getting if you were lean. Like you'd rather lean build for 10 months straight. That's going to take longer, but you're going to accrue a whole lot of muscle, because when you're building, you've got to build for a long time. You can't bulk for like 2 months and cut, because you haven't given your body enough time to accrue effective muscle. It takes time to build quality muscle. It takes months, bro, at least 6-7 months. And if you can stay under 15% body fat, you give your body a better chance to recruit more muscle fibers through all the protein getting converted to amino acids, which helps with protein muscle synthesis if you're training consistently and putting in that work, as well as eating carbohydrates at the right time. Before you train, after you train, and making sure you're not anywhere higher than probably 16% body fat, really. That's where you're a coach, or if you've ever been coached like you guys, you always want to make sure you get at least under 15% body fat. Anywhere around 10 is a sweet spot. And now, I'm going to show you a graph that I wish I knew a whole lot earlier. So this is what it actually looks like. That's 35 to 40. That's around 20 to 24%, 11, 12%. You see a lot of guys getting DEXA scans, and they might look like that, and they think they're 10%, bro. There's a proper way to measure your fat, and it's to do with bodybuilding. You measure your 3 weak areas in your body, and you measure the length of fat that you can measure when you extend it. But that's something that I'm going to get into another presentation. That's proper advanced bodybuilding metrics. But this visual cue is more than enough that we need to understand where we're sitting and where we need to get to for a certain amount of time. Like, you don't really want to get any bigger than those 2 photos there. And now let's play a little. Are you guys picking up so far?
Yeah.
Hector. Now let's play a little game to finish this one off. Body fat and the visual cue. So based on this graph, based on everything I've just told you, here's some photos of me. Let's guess what body fat percentage I was here. Drop your arms, drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll let you know which one it was. Come on, boys. Let's see. So based on that, let's go. I'd say close to 24%. It was the closest. Max.
Oh, Max.
Max, fucking oath.
Whack,
Now
Max.
based on this one, yeah? Based on this Bruno Mars looking motherfucker. Let's have a look. So based on what would you say? What would you say it is? Let's see if Big Russ wants to get in the game. Big Russ, what you got for us?
I'll go 15.
Hell yeah. Let's see. This one was a close one because I was like torn between a few numbers as well, eh? 15. 14 to 15. Yeah.
Let's get it.
Let's get it. Okay. And now this one. Which one do we think this is? Going to go back to this graph. What are we thinking? When you know you've got veins everywhere, that's kind of an indication of you to be at least under 10%. What do we think, Big Rice?
9. Okay, 9.
So 6, 8, 7. Let's see. Yeah, 8, 9. More likely, probably 8.5 to be exact. Now you understand how, as I'm sure some of you guys might have noticed, the linear you get a better pump at the gym. You feel a lot more mind-muscle connection. That's got a lot to do with everything we've just covered into this presentation. That's why it's imperative to always cut down to a certain level, understand your meal timing, understand all the factors at play in terms of insulin sensitivity, in terms of your body actually, one, getting the right micronutrients in, getting the right protein that gets converted to amino acids that are the building blocks of the muscle. So when you're training, you repair the muscle, you need to get the protein in that goes to your bloodstream, gets converted to muscle, and then your carbohydrates, which is your simple sugars, your complex sugars, that gets converted to glucose in the bloodstream. That if they're not used immediately during a session, they get converted to glycogen, which is like the pump. Glycogen is your pump. So all these factors play a big role in the amount of macronutrients that can actually go into your body, and then your body's ability to respond to all those factors has a lot to do with our body fat percentage, our muscle mass, training, sleep, stress. You can understand how it's imperative to stay within a certain fat percentage. There's a threshold, and it's different for both a natural athlete and an enhanced athlete.
Now, if you enjoyed that presentation, that's exactly one of the presentations I run in my one-on-one program inside of that brotherhood, which is my school community of my one-on-one boys. And if that's something you know you need into your life, you need that structure, you need that accountability, you need that daily group call and that brotherhood connection where you learn new things every fucking week that no other coach in the field is putting together for his boys, then either message me on Instagram, let's talk, or book a call directly one-on-one with me. And let's see if you're the right fit for what I offer. So run it up. I'll look forward to speaking to you soon, my brother. Let's get it.